Hey, Suave here. Come with me back to the early 2000s as I scurry to the family computer for my unsupervised internet time after school. Or sometimes pretending to be sick just to stay home and be online anyway. In this wild west of the World Wide Web, I hung around the few usual spots. Adventure Quest, RuneScape, Newgrounds, Gaia Online, and Neopets. If it had any kind of fantasy theme and could be played in my browser, I was all for it. I would highly recommend Izzy's channel for more deep dives on older internet media, or even the Amanda Files for modern day Neopets content. And later on, when I start talking about how I remember role-playing in some of these communities, be sure to check out Karen Terry's Spare Room series, talking all about text-based roleplay. But let's get started, shall we? My role-playing experience started way back in the fast and dirty depths of AOL Instant Messenger. It's hard to explain how challenging it was to find role players, but somehow I managed to find a reliable RP partner. He was a little older than me, and our interactions mostly consisted of some form of Digimon scene play in alternating color schemes to distinguish which character was which. Our conversations typically started around 9 p.m., and we would usually run this one-shot scenario of our heroes encountering the villain until one of us would have to log off around 3 a.m. Also, whether I was a dumb kid who didn't understand how to explore the program's settings or not, AIM didn't preserve my chat history in program at the time. I was under the impression that it would be lost to the void if I didn't save every word for myself. After all this time, I somehow preserved a session of that roleplay that I had printed out for the sole purpose of starting a comic of that scene. Of course, it's cringe, but that's kind of the charm of looking back at it now. There wasn't any skill or goal to the scene, just two strangers on the internet in the late 90s with a passion for Digimon. Enough to roleplay 6 hours in the middle of the night just to create a little bit more content for it. For the next several years, I somehow thought this was a unique experience. Few people I knew had internet access like I did, and no one I knew understood what role-playing online like that meant. Little did I know that AIM was just the training wheels of what was to come next. If you're unfamiliar with Gaia Online, it's a multiplayer browser game from the mid-2000s featuring highly customizable avatars and a dense interface filled with minigames, shops, events, and way more. I mean, goddamn, why are there like 8 different in-game shops? It makes it impossible to find one pair of glasses. And look how small everything is. I can hardly see her hair. Anyway, I'd highly recommend Billiam's vid, Gaia Online Still Exists, or even deeper dive from Redbard's vid, The Rise and Fall of Gaia Online. But what I remember most from the site are the forums, and specifically, the chatterbox. Because there isn't a dedicated roleplay category for some reason, kind of a missed opportunity there. Basically, a few users, 1 or 2 usually, would moderate and create a game within the forum. The top post would explain what it was about, the rules and how to apply, and then you drop your application into a comment, wait to be accepted, and then just tag into the chaos of the entire thing. From what I remember, the most popular were the Academy scenarios, where your character would be accepted into the themed school and live out the drama of being a student. Usually, this was within OC. I'm not entirely sure how popular pan fandom was at the time, but plenty of people used their avatars to cosplay characters from different shows to enter costume contests too. So I'm only assuming there would also be a specific Naruto Academy game somewhere out there. I tried to go back to find some examples from 2009, but there are
419,431
pages and 16 million posts. So nowadays, modern Gaia Online role players seem more organized, with clean layouts and separate threads, with out-of-character Discord servers for plotting. But we'll get to Discord later. To be honest, I don't remember too much of my time on Gaia, aside from HTML formatting signatures and posts and profile pages to look pretty, and experiencing the roleplay rather passively. LiveJournal was my first real test, playing with the big boys, as it were, in an inexperienced sort of way. This is where I really leaned into learning character analysis. And not just reading the Wikipedia page and rehashing that, but diving into my interpretation of a character's motivation. You'd think this sounds like a straightforward process, but when it's your first time or two and you haven't quite found your writing voice yet, it can get pretty messy. And I was only on LiveJournal for a short time, before the exodus to Dreamwidth. I won't be diving into the community drama in this vid, just know that Dreamwidth was basically the same site as far as functionality went. What quickly became my favorite part of role-playing on a journal site like Dreamwidth was the sheer amount of customization that became available. You could make a single journal as a hub to house your separate journals dedicated to each character you wanted to play. Typically, each journal would have a silly, unique username, usually some deep-cut reference to their canon, the if you know sort of thing. And you could upload a handful of expressions as icons. That essentially transformed this form of roleplay into more of a visual novel. Now, the way it worked was pretty simple. You applied for games pretty much the same as Gaia Online, posting your application to a specific post and waiting for a mod to approve it. And once you were in, you could go into the community's game journal and make a public post that other characters could reply to. Usually, you'd clarify if it was a network post that was made on the in-universe internet, or state a physical location where the character was for face-to-face interactions. Network threads typically used fairly loose prose, a line or two of external dialogue with some internal dialogue for flavor. Longer narrative paragraphs were more popular for face-to-face interactions, where you're able to describe the environment, the facial expressions, the physical contact, etc., etc. Of course, these weren't hard rules by any means, more like unspoken trends, or currently. I wouldn't know. I'm not really on Dreamwidth anymore. I did hop back on just enough to check out Baker Street. Baker Street is a little more freeform. You don't have to apply with a long-winded application to join. Instead, you can simply reply to the daily memes that they post up. This was and still appears to be the most popular way to participate in journal role-playing without wholly committing to a game. However, I should mention that without the popularity of modern or well-known characters, it's more like fishing, trying to get a bite, trying to get someone to tag you. That's what it's called, to reply to someone's post. Like, tag, you're it. By far, Dreamwidth was the most influential stage of my role-playing journey. But we're only halfway there. So let's keep going. Around that time, I moved away from Dreamwidth. I was still interested in the hobby of roleplay, but now without an outlet, I took to writing some fanfiction here and there instead. Eventually, that evolved into playing tabletop role-playing games like Dark Heresy and Pathfinder with my friends. This became my main focus as far as the hobby went, with creating unique characters and original campaigns for either a small table or just a one-on-one story. But obviously, I couldn't be playing tabletop all the time, so what else was I trying out in the interim? Well, Final Fantasy Online. I touched on my experience with FFRP a while back, but for a brief explanation, it's actually pretty similar to my AIM days. You're actively engaged with a single role player at once, sometimes multiple, but you're sitting there, waiting for replies, except now you have an avatar to loosely represent what's going on with the occasional emote gesture, otherwise standing in complete silence as you wait for the other player to respond. Honestly, the pacing was way too slow for the level of engagement required. I couldn't tab away to work on other things for fear of missing a response, or even step away to work on anything else for that matter. And a single conversation would often take an hour, with such little payoff, before one person or the other had to call it quits. As much as I loved the idea of it, it just wasn't for me. FFRP did, however, introduce me to Card. Not sponsored, but Card is a versatile site builder, typically used as a landing page for social medias, like Linktree would be. But I've also seen other artists use it throughout the Twitter space as a way to advertise their commissions too. Back to the role-playing aspect, however, Card can be designed to feature your character in a functional animated page. As far as I'm concerned, it's the closest thing to an official website you could possibly use to display all of the work you've put into your creation. Where journal sites were limited to static formatting and stationary posts, now you can create motion between segments of your character's profile to give it a little spice. Or even use it to post event information for community meetups or parties. The Final Fantasy XIV community loves to use Card for adverts for their free companies or nightclubs. I've seen a lot of creative stuff. But, as I said, my time in FFRP didn't last very long, so I decided to try something completely different. Twitter ended up being more like Dreamwidth than I thought it would be. Where I was expecting a fast-paced hop-in, hop-out experience, it was incredibly slow to pick up, and even slower paced. As short-lived as it was, designing the profile was probably my favorite part. Something about creating an aesthetic profile with a pinned comment that had such a clean look. However, the chaos of the thread system gave me Gaia Online flashbacks. It was nearly impossible to keep track of anything, and you have to put out so many feelers. It's just disheartening when you don't get any hits even to simple posts. I don't think there was really a way to tell, but it definitely feels like the role-playing community on Twitter is pretty niche. So if you don't hit it off right away, it feels like it won't happen at all. But Twitter wasn't a full loss. Unrelated to my attempts at role-playing on the platform, I actually met my roleplay partner through an art giveaway that I was hosting a few years back, and we've been thick as thieves ever since. But just a small sidebar before I get into the last part here. Notion is another invaluable resource that I discovered somewhere along the way. Yet another site builder with completely customizable modules that you can craft to hold whatever you like. Plenty of folks use them as trackers or planners, but I ended up creating a sort of Wikipedia database for all of my characters. Granted, there is a slight learning curve as you get used to the way the site works. You have to cross-check it with the mobile to make sure it all looks correct. But once you get a little used to it, it's really easy to set up and make your own. And I wanted to mention Notion because I have been known to put together new pages for my creative writing partner whenever we come up with a new canon, acting as the story's main page. Let me back up a little bit. Because my roleplay partner and I don't actually stay on Twitter to roleplay. We pretty quickly moved over to Discord when we first started talking and getting to know each other. But we went from DMing each other to making a small server to share different ideas, one thing led to another, and now anytime we come up with a new story, we just make a new category with new channels and get to work writing our novel-length responses back and forth to each other. Sometimes we respond a couple times in a single day, sometimes we don't respond for weeks, because we're adults and we have our own shit going on. Sometimes we can't focus on writing or art like we really want to, but the great thing is that those stories are always there waiting for us to jump right back in without the pressure of needing to respond right away. Or, like I said, if we just feel like we need to start something fresh, that inspires us. It happens every couple months, really. And it technically started with our first art fight in 2022. We made 2 OCs that have now gone through many different iterations, added some new staple characters to the roster. We basically have a whole cast at this point. And for the most part, our responses are pretty lengthy, but we support each other when we want to try new formats too. And the great thing about having a private server with someone you really get along with is that you can kind of just play around with what works or what doesn't, and no one ever has to know. If you don't already have a private server to yourself or for you and a friend, I would highly recommend it. Even if you don't invite anyone else to join it. Discord and Notion have become my favorite tools for prepping and planning stories and campaigns, and maybe I'll make a more in-depth video on exactly how I use Discord and Notion for that, but I think I've covered just about everything else for today. And it's definitely time to wrap this up. Huge thank you to Shay, Medium Fry, and Isakawa. And of course to my other supporters. I've been trying a lot of new things lately, and while some of it hasn't really stuck, you guys have stuck with me, and I appreciate that so much. I have started streaming Monday, Tuesday, and Thursdays over on Twitch. In fact, we're having a pretty big party tomorrow, June 27th, to celebrate our 4 months of streaming. I know this is the definition of a short notice, but I really needed the extra month to work on this bid. Otherwise, all you YouTube people would have known a lot sooner, and that's just how it be sometimes. So, if you can stop by and say hi, I'd be happy to see you, and if not, I'll save a party hat for you for next time. All of the details for the celebration and future updates can be found on our Discord, or over on Twitter or TikTok if you prefer those platforms instead. All of the links below. 2 months actually ended up being a pretty comfortable amount of time to prepare this bid, so tentatively expect the next one in another month or so. And if it comes early, then that's even better. But for now, I'll see ya.